An HOA president thought she was just enforcing neighborhood rules, until she cut the wrong lock and triggered a full-blown police sting. You won't believe the twists that follow. The quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek slept under a silver moon, the kind of night where even the crickets seemed to whisper. Mark Harris, an undercover detective with the city's auto theft task force, eased his rugged black Jeep into his driveway. The vehicle looked like any other off-road machine to casual eyes, but it carried hidden cameras, a disguised GPS tracker, and a secure compartment for sensitive evidence. Tonight had been long and tense. He had been trailing a crew of professional car thieves, and every detail of his work depended on keeping his gear safe. Mark stepped out and stretched, scanning the stillness. Years on the force had taught him never to let his guard down, even at home. He looped a heavy-duty chain through the gate and snapped a thick padlock into place, tugging on it to make sure it held. Satisfied, he brushed the dust from his hands and walked toward the porch. The smell of freshly watered lawns drifted in the cool air, and for a moment it felt like an ordinary evening. Inside, the glow of a single lamp and the low hum of the refrigerator greeted him. He poured himself a glass of water, his mind still replaying the night's surveillance footage. Across the street, a pair of watchful eyes tracked his every move. Karen Miller, the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's Homeowners Association, stood hidden behind the lace curtains of her living room. Her narrow face tightened as she watched Mark secure the lock. She had never trusted him. To her, the Jeep was too aggressive, the dark-tinted windows suspicious, the occasional late-night arrivals proof of something shady. She had complained at meetings about his non-compliant parking and the unapproved modifications on his vehicle. Each time, the rest of the board had shrugged, telling her to let it go. But Karen wasn't the type to let anything go. As Mark finally disappeared inside, Karen muttered under her breath, "No one's above HOA rules. Not even him." Her fingers drummed against the windowsill while her mind spun with irritation. That Jeep ruined the pristine view of the cul-de-sac she fought so hard to maintain. She pictured the glossy neighborhood newsletter with its cheerful photos and perfect driveways, and then imagined that dark, menacing vehicle marring every scene. To Karen, it wasn't just a car. It was a challenge to her authority. A black mark on everything she believed she kept under control. The night grew quieter, but in Karen's living room a storm of plans was already taking shape. The next afternoon the sun baked the quiet street, casting long shadows from the neat rows of mailbox posts. Karen Miller paced in her kitchen, peeking through the blinds every few minutes. Mark's Jeep sat in the driveway, gleaming like a stubborn reminder of everything she disliked. She had spent the morning rereading the HOA handbook, highlighting every section about vehicle appearance and driveway regulations. None of it specifically mentioned military-looking Jeeps, but that didn't matter to her. In her mind, the Jeep clearly violated the spirit of the rules. Karen slipped on a wide-brimmed sun hat and stuffed a pair of heavy bolt cutters into a reusable grocery bag, nestling them between celery stalks and paper towels to disguise the metallic glint. Her heart thudded with a strange mix of nerves and self-righteous energy. "If the board won't enforce the standards, I will," she whispered to herself, locking her front door behind her. The neighborhood was sleepy in the heat of the day. A lawn sprinkler ticked rhythmically somewhere down the block. Karen walked across the street with brisk, determined steps, her sandals clacking softly on the pavement. She paused at the gate in front of Mark's driveway, the thick chain and padlock exactly where he'd left them the night before. For a moment she hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. Then she tugged the bolt cutters free, the cool steel biting into her palms. With one swift squeeze, the metal lock snapped. The sharp clack echoed louder than she expected, making her flinch. The broken chain drooped toward the ground, a small pile of links resting like evidence at her feet. A neighbor watering his roses across the street looked up, eyebrows knitting together. "Karen? What are you doing?" he called, curiosity edging his voice. "HOA business," she replied quickly, waving him off with a tight smile. "We've had complaints about this vehicle. Authorized removal." The neighbor shrugged uncertainly and went back to his hose, though his eyes lingered for a second longer than Karen liked. She pressed on, opening the gate and stepping closer to the Jeep. Its black paint absorbed the sunlight, radiating heat. Karen climbed into the driver's seat, surprised at how clean and meticulously organized it was inside. The faint scent of leather mixed with something more industrial, Oil, maybe, or metal polish. She pushed the keyless ignition button, but nothing happened. Frowning, she jiggled the steering wheel and tried again. That's when she heard it. A faint, high-pitched beep from the dashboard. A small red LED light flickered to life, steady and deliberate like an unblinking eye. Karen froze. The beeping grew slightly louder, echoing in the enclosed cabin. "What on earth?" she murmured. Was this some kind of custom alarm system? A security tracker? The thought that she might have triggered something serious prickled her skin. She glanced around the empty street, suddenly aware of every rustling leaf and every passing car in the distance. Despite the growing knot in her stomach, she reached for the ignition again, determined not to let a little noise scare her off. But the red light pulsed faster now and a second tone joined the first. A sharper, more urgent chirp. The Jeep almost seemed alive, warning her away. Karen's grip on the steering wheel tightened as a sliver of doubt crept in. Maybe this wasn't going to be as simple as she had imagined. Mark pulled into the cul-de-sac earlier than usual, the hum of his unmarked sedan low and steady. He slowed as he reached his driveway, and an uneasy feeling prickled the back of his neck. Something was wrong. The heavy-duty chain that normally glinted in the sun lay slack and broken near the gate, the padlock nowhere in sight. His pulse quickened. He stepped out of the car and crouched near the driveway, scanning the ground. The chain's end showed a clean cut, sharp and deliberate. This wasn't a weak link snapping on its own. Someone had forced it. Mark's mind jumped instantly to his work. The Jeep wasn't just a personal vehicle. It carried encrypted surveillance gear and hidden decoys for a sting operation that had taken months to set up. If that equipment fell into the wrong hands, it could blow their entire case wide open. He grabbed his phone, thumb already dialing his partner. "Jake, we've got a breach," he said in a low, clipped voice. "My Jeep's been tampered with, could be related to the operation." His partner's response was equally sharp. "Call it in. I'm en route." Without wasting a second, Mark also called 911, reporting a possible theft in progress and explaining, carefully but urgently, that a police task force vehicle was involved. As he hung up, his eyes swept the quiet street. Lawns were still, curtains drawn, but he couldn't shake the sense of eyes watching from somewhere. Meanwhile, inside the Jeep, Karen's panic was mounting. The beeping from the dashboard had intensified into a steady, high-pitched alarm that seemed to vibrate through the seat. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the ignition again, but the engine refused to turn over. She pushed the door open, the hot afternoon air rushing in like a warning. A distant rumble of engines made her look up. Two dark SUVs rounded the corner and rolled toward the driveway with deliberate speed. They stopped abruptly, doors opening in unison. Plainclothes officers stepped out, their movements precise and practiced. Their hands rested near their holsters, ready but not drawn. "Step away from the vehicle," one officer commanded, his voice sharp enough to slice through the stillness. Karen startled, her grocery bag tumbling onto the driveway. "This is HOA business," she stammered, lifting her hands instinctively. "That's my neighbor's car. He's violating our regulations. I'm authorized to—" "Ma'am, step back now," another officer interrupted, eyes fixed on her. The officers exchanged quick, subtle signals as they approached. One of them circled to the rear of the Jeep, checking the locks and peering inside as if expecting something dangerous. Karen's heart thudded so hard she could hear it in her ears. This wasn't a simple neighborhood dispute anymore. The red light on the dashboard kept blinking like a silent accusation. She backed away slowly, suddenly aware of how the broken chain and bolt cutters lying nearby must look. From down the street, Mark's sedan came into view, tires crunching against the pavement. He leapt out before the car fully stopped, badge flashing in the sunlight. "That's my vehicle," he called, striding toward the officers. His gaze fell on Karen, then on the snapped chain at her feet, and his jaw tightened. "And that is evidence in an active task force operation." Karen blinked, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "A cop? Evidence?" The words didn't make sense. The officers glanced at Mark, their stance easing slightly but their attention still locked on the scene. Around them, neighbors began to peek from doorways and behind curtains, phones already lifted to record what promised to be the day's biggest drama. Elmark's shoes scraped against the driveway as he closed the distance to the Jeep, the late afternoon sun glinting off his badge. His eyes locked on Karen, and a mixture of anger and disbelief flickered across his face. Do you have any idea what you've just done? He asked, voice sharp but controlled. Karen instinctively stepped back, clutching the handles of her empty grocery bag like a shield. This is a neighborhood matter, she said quickly, her words tumbling over one another. Your vehicle is out of compliance with HOA rules. You cut my lock and entered a police task force vehicle, Mark interrupted, his tone cutting through her excuses. He gestured toward the broken chain and bolt cutters lying in plain view. This Jeep isn't just my personal property. It's part of an ongoing undercover investigation. You could have compromised months of work and put lives at risk. One of the plainclothes officers knelt by the Jeep, running a small flashlight over the door frame and the ignition area. No sign of forced entry beyond the lock, he reported. Equipment looks untouched, but the tracker shows movement enough to trigger a silent alert. He glanced at Karen, his expression unreadable but firm. Karen's face drained of color. A police investigation, she whispered, as if the words themselves didn't fit the picture she'd built in her head. Around them, neighbors began to gather in cautious clusters at the edges of their yards. Phone cameras gleamed like curious eyes, capturing every second. A teenager whispered to a friend, "Is that the HOA lady? What is she doing?" Mark took a measured step closer, lowering his voice just enough for Karen to hear. I had evidence in there. Sensitive files. You didn't just break a rule, you interfered with law enforcement. I thought you were hiding something, Karen stammered. Coming home late. That Jeep always parked like you owned the street. I was only trying to protect the neighborhood. Her voice cracked, the self-assured tone she always carried in HOA meetings gone. Protecting the neighborhood doesn't mean breaking the law, Mark replied. He nodded toward the officers, who exchanged brief, knowing looks. One of them approached Karen. Ma'am, the officer said evenly, you're under arrest for attempted vehicle theft, destruction of property, and interfering with a police investigation. Please place your hands where I can see them. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Karen's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Arrest? No, you don't understand. I'm the HOA president. That title doesn't place you above the law, the officer said, gently but firmly taking hold of her wrist as another officer produced a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click echoed in the still air, a sharp contrast to the distant chirp of birds. As Karen was guided toward the waiting SUV, neighbors exchanged murmurs of disbelief. A few recorded every step, their voices low but incredulous. Karen? The HOA Karen? Arrested? Mark exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing as the officers secured the Jeep once more. He gave the vehicle a quick inspection, camera lenses intact, hidden compartments still sealed, the blinking tracker now silent. Relief washed over him. The operation could continue. He turned to the small crowd and spoke with calm authority. This was an active law enforcement vehicle. What you just witnessed is exactly why we urge caution before jumping to conclusions. Karen glanced back from the SUV's open door, her earlier confidence gone. The neighborhood she had tried to control now stared at her with a mixture of shock and pity. The woman who once enforced every minor rule had become the center of a very different story, one she could no longer rewrite. The story of the HOA president who cut a police lock spread through Willow Creek, faster than the scent of fresh-cut grass on a spring morning. By the next day, the cul-de-sac buzzed with whispers. Neighbors who once avoided Karen's sharp eye now stood in small groups, replaying every detail they had witnessed. Someone uploaded a shaky phone video to a community Facebook page, and within hours it leapt to local news sites. The headline was irresistible. HOA president arrested after breaking into police task force vehicle. Reporters soon arrived. Their camera crews parked right where Karen used to scold visitors for staying too long. Curious residents peeked from windows as microphones pointed toward Mark's driveway. He stood beside his gleaming black Jeep, now secure behind a fresh, reinforced lock. Calm and collected, he gave a brief statement to the press. This vehicle was part of an undercover operation, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of dry humor. Fortunately, nothing critical was lost. But let this be a reminder. A neighborhood rulebook is not the law. His words played on every local news station that evening. Karen, meanwhile, faced a storm of consequences she never imagined. After a tense night in a holding cell, she was released on bail but charged with attempted vehicle theft, destruction of property, and interference with a police investigation. The once formidable leader of the HOA now found herself hiring a defense lawyer and fielding calls from reporters eager for her side of the story. The HOA board, desperate to salvage the neighborhood's reputation, convened an emergency meeting. By unanimous vote, they removed Karen from her position as president, citing conduct unbecoming of community standards. Flyers announcing a new election soon dotted every mailbox, an ironic twist for a woman who once dictated the neighborhood's rules. Some neighbors felt a twinge of pity when they saw her returning home, head down, avoiding every gaze. But many remembered her years of strict notices about lawn heights, mailbox paint colors, and garbage bins left out an hour too long. To them, the fall of the self-appointed enforcer was almost poetic. One resident joked online, "Guess the HOA finally enforced itself." The comment quickly racked up hundreds of likes. For Mark, the days following the incident were a strange mix of relief and quiet satisfaction. His task force operation continued without a hitch, the equipment inside the Jeep unharmed. At the next community gathering, he was approached not with suspicion, but with nods of respect and gratitude. Parents thanked him for serving the city, and kids asked if his Jeep was a spy car. He smiled politely, never revealing more than he had to. As weeks passed, the cul-de-sac returned to its usual calm, though the memory of that day lingered like an unexpected echo. The fresh chain across Mark's gate gleamed in the sun, a silent reminder of the night the neighborhood's biggest rule enforcer crossed a line she could never erase. And whenever someone mentioned HOA regulations, the story of Karen and the police jeep surfaced again, told with laughter, disbelief, and the unmistakable lesson that authority means nothing when it's misused. And that's how a simple neighborhood dispute turned into a full-on police operation. If you enjoyed this wild true story, hit that like button, share it with a friend who loves dramatic twists, and subscribe so you don't miss the next unbelievable tale. What would you have done if you were in Mark's shoes or Karen's? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and stay tuned for more jaw-dropping stories every week.